through policy work, research, and training, and I'm now based in California. Greg?
Hi everyone, my name is Greg Fry. I'm happy to be helping Shoana with this presentation. I am a research forester at the USDA Forest Service Southern Research Station. My work involves economic methods to evaluate the impacts of forest policy, regulation, and taxes. Previously, I've also worked at the World Bank, where I help countries create policy to slow deforestation, and also at Virginia State University, where I educated about and researched resource management and sustainable income streams. So thanks, Shoana. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. So I wanted to start the presentation with some background on where green value came from. From 2006 to 2008, Dr. Thomas Holmes of the U.S. Forest Service and I investigated the financial viability and socioeconomic impacts of new community forest enterprises in Brazil. These new enterprises had received substantial financial support from the government and other collaborators to initiate timber enterprises. And we wanted to see if when this support ended, the income generated from the sale of timber products would be sufficient to cover the costs of operation. So we developed a simplified participatory method to work with the people involved in these new enterprises to identify, organize, and analyze information on their costs and income. There was a lot of interest in the results of the study and in the methodology that we used. So Tom and I decided to turn this research method into a financial analysis tool that others could use, and this is what became Green Value. Then from 2012 to 2017, I led the Strengthening Community-Based Forest Enterprises in the Amazon Region project at Earth Innovation Institute, based in San Francisco. And over the 5 years of the project, excuse me, I worked with local organizations in 5 countries in the Amazon basin, as well as in Guatemala, to implement 16 training events of 3 days each. We had a total of 260 participants from these community and family forest enterprises, government organizations, and nonprofits. And during each event, we analyzed real products and services that workshop participants were involved in. Let's see. So then, well, now I'm very happy to be working with Greg and Tom to promote the use of green value in the U.S., where we think it could be quite helpful, and also in other places around the globe. Oops. Okay. So I want to provide some information on what is green value. It provides a method and materials for monitoring and analyzing costs and income. And while Tom and I developed the simplified tool originally to look at costs and income for timber products, we quickly realized that it could really be used for any type of product or service, and I'll show some examples of that in a few slides. And we've, over time, developed the tool where we have a couple different options. Users can look at just one product at a time and complete a set of worksheets for that, or they can look at up to 3 products at a time in the same set of worksheets and then look at each product separately as well as all 3 products as a production system. And we've also developed an option where people can look at just one productive period, for example, up to 1 year, or once they have data for several different productive cycles or years, they can plug those results into a net present value table that we've developed. And I wanted to briefly describe the components of this simplified approach. We do have 6 steps. It begins in step 1 with planning. Who is the enterprise or initiative that we'll be looking at? What is the product or service that they're producing and selling? Then we have an optional step 2, where the worksheets that we've developed can be printed and data can be on cost and revenue can be noted by hand. Then in step 3, the data is entered digitally into pre-formatted worksheets that we provide. In step 4, subtotals are generated, and this provides the user an opportunity to verify the quality of the data, make sure everything's correct. Before moving on to step 5, which is where we have a summary worksheet that brings all the information collected so far together and analyzes it, We have several financial indicators that are generated automatically based on this data. We also have graphs that are generated automatically, and we have a sensitivity analysis worksheet. Then finally, in step 6, we emphasize the importance of really discussing and reflecting on the results and coming up with ways that they can be improved over time. So some additional points. One thing that's kind of different about green value from other tools that we've seen and other types of analyses we've seen is that we really encourage users to include all costs, including, for example, the purchase of machinery and equipment at a subsidized rate, or perhaps often this is even gifted to an enterprise. We want to make sure to include that, as well as training and technical assistance that might be offered at reduced cost or for free. If we include all of this, we'll be sure to calculate the true cost of production. And I also want to emphasize that green value is not intended to replace accounting systems. And forest enterprises, like all enterprises, are required to report financial information at the end of each year. And green value is a financial analysis tool, so its results are going to vary somewhat from the results of accounting systems. So we want to emphasize that it's not meant to replace accounting systems, but can definitely work in tandem with those using a lot of the same information. So Tom and I designed green value to be useful for a variety of what we call forest-based initiatives. We came up with this term to be as inclusive as possible. And so these might include family forest owners or farmers, community associations or enterprises, other types of small to medium scale forest enterprises, cooperatives, and other types of private businesses, such as consultants or contractors. And these initiatives can be operating at different points in value chains, from the forest level to intermediary points where primary and secondary processing is happening, to end sellers of end products, such as small stores. We've used the tools so far for all these different types of forest-based initiatives operating at these different points in the value chain. And then with regards to who is actually entering the information into the green value tool, these can include administrators of the initiatives listed above, or folks from collaborators, such as nonprofit organizations, government agencies, or aid programs. As well, sometimes you have contractors or consultants that work with these enterprises that could also help with entering this information. And sometimes you have researchers that are eager to help to do this because they're interested in the results and in supporting these initiatives. So as far as the why of green value, Tom and I developed these tools, or this tool and the different materials related to it, with the overarching goal of strengthening forest-based initiatives. We're really interested in helping improve the management capacity of initiatives, especially with regard to generating high-quality financial information, which can in turn help inform decisions that need to be made on a regular basis regarding these enterprises or initiatives. And also, we want to help improve the transparency of financial information. And the hope is that this will then contribute to improving the long-term viability and sustainability of these initiatives. In addition, when people who use the tool are interested in sharing that information, we're very interested in getting this information to folks to help increase awareness within the forestry sector about the role of forest-based initiatives in local development. This includes many types of financial benefits, from direct benefits, from paying income or paying wages to folks, to local workers, to purchasing materials and services from local businesses, and investing profits to the benefit of local communities. And also highlighting the really critical role they play in managing forests and other natural resources. And the hope is that with improved information available, this will help motivate governments, donors, industries, and other collaborators to invest in forest-based initiatives, including offering low-cost and easier to access credit, technical assistance, and also favoring forest-based initiatives in their purchasing decisions. And also, we're hoping it will motivate them to improve the context in which forest-based initiatives operate. Illegal markets are a big issue in Latin America where I've been working, and these make it very difficult for small enterprises that want to do things legally to compete. In addition, inappropriate and or conflicting policies, highly bureaucratic systems, and poor infrastructure, which are more common around the world, really help drive up costs, and this can also make it difficult for these enterprises to compete and to be viable. Okay, so for these reasons, we developed Green Value, which is comprised of a user's guide and pre-formatted worksheets. So the user's guide involves a lot of really interesting and helpful information that includes a review of financial concepts and formulas, which those of us who don't work in financial analysis all the time will find useful. And then we have a chapter that provides very detailed instructions on how to use the pre-formatted worksheets with illustrated examples. And then we do have these pre-formatted worksheets for each of the 6 steps that I outlined. So a bit more information about the worksheets. They're used to organize financial information by costs and by income. So we further divide up costs by activity, and we recommend having, when you're looking at one product or service, 3 to 5 main productive activities that might have several minor activities associated with them, but we try to group them into 3 to 5 main ones. And then we also have administrative activities. Then we further divide costs by type of input, and the 3 main types of input that we look at are labor, materials and services, and machinery and equipment. So I'll show you some examples of the worksheets so you can see how we organize this cost information. And then we also further divide up income by revenues from sales as well as other sources of income. And the worksheets are meant to be completed for each productive period, which is a maximum of 1 year. So if you're working on something like Brazil nuts, which we looked at several instances of Brazil nut collection in South America, the productive period might be a few weeks or a few months, depending on the area. Whereas if you're working with timber and you're doing at least primary processing, the operation might run the whole year. Okay, we've also built in some options and flexibility. Tom and I designed these worksheets to be adaptable for each forest-based initiative. So they were designed in Excel and can be used in different types of spreadsheet software. And we left the worksheets unprotected so that they can be adapted. We realized we can't develop worksheets that will work in every situation, although we also have found that they need very little adaptation for the majority of cases that we've looked at, but we wanted to leave that option there. And we developed, as I mentioned, the net present value worksheet so that folks can look at results over multiple productive periods. And also I want to mention that once you have completed cost and income information for one productive period or for several productive periods, you can then alter the information to look at different scenarios. So for example, I came across a lot of small timber operations where they were harvesting trees and wanted to add value to them, but weren't sure how that would affect their bottom line. So you could take a copy of the worksheets that you've completed, add the costs of buying machinery and equipment, as well as the additional costs of labor for operating those machines or pieces of equipment, and the types of other inputs like materials and services for maintaining them, and see how that affects your results. Okay, so I wanted to give an idea, show you, we analyzed over 40 different products and services in our workshops over the last 5 years, and these are some examples of products and services we looked at. A variety of different types of timber products, from standing trees to logs in the forest or in the patio, lumber and finished products such as desks and other types of furniture. Then we've also looked at a variety of non-timber forest products, or NTFPs, and services, including artisan textiles, bamboo in different forms, Brazil nuts, natural latex or rubber, a variety of types of agricultural crops, fruit pulp, freshwater fisheries, ecosystem services such as carbon credits, and tourism. So we haven't found a product or service yet that we've had a hard time using green value with. And in talking to Tom and Greg, we came up with a list of different types of products and services we thought would be interesting to use green value with in the U.S. This includes timber harvests and natural forests or plantations, firewood, agroforestry systems on different products those might produce, silvopastoral models, non-timber forest products such as pine straw or mushrooms, and services including hunting, fishing, and environmental services. So those are just some ideas we came up with, and I'm sure there are many others. So I wanted to show some excerpts of the worksheets so you have an idea of what those look like, and I decided to populate them with an example of a community enterprise in Latin America producing and selling dimensional lumber from a natural forest. And we looked at 1 year of operation. These types of enterprises, and we looked at many of them in Latin America, always have to meet very strict regulations on which forests can be managed, which areas within forests can be harvested for timber, how those trees are cut, and how they're transported to minimize environmental and social impacts. And we only worked with legal enterprises. So again, one of the first things we did was identify the main productive activities so that we could divide up costs along those lines, and we separated out administrative costs from those. So the main activities were plan, fell trees, tree removal, log measurement and transport, and milling. So this is an excerpt from our worksheet that can be printed in step 2 and used for the manual entering of information, or used in digital form on a computer for entering information on labor. And this is labor that is remunerated or paid out based on time worked. We also have an option based on production. So at the beginning, at the top of the worksheet, we have the title, we have the name, a box for the name of the initiative, we have instructions. These are detailed instructions on how to complete the worksheet, which I've shortened in the interest of space. And then we have a table for each main productive activity in one worksheet. So if we were actually in Excel or another spreadsheet software, we could scroll down and see 5 different tables here for 5 main productive activities. So at the beginning of the first table, we have the name of the activity, which is plan. We have the supervisor, which is Carlos. Then in the table itself, we have the first 3 columns are for noting the first day of the week. And we've organized this table to capture labor information per week per worker. So we have the first worker is Joaquin. We have his position as compass operator. Then we have columns for each day of the week, Monday to Sunday, and we can note if Joaquin worked 1 full day, a half day, or not at all, with a 0. Then we have a column that automatically sums those days worked. In this case it was 5. The daily wage is 90, whatever the local currency is. And then we have a column that subtotals the wage for each worker per week. And we would stay in the same table to note all of the labor information over the productive period for this activity. So at the end, we see at the bottom of the table, we would have subtotals that are automatically updated regarding the days worked. These are not calendar days, but the unit of days worked for all workers. And then a subtotal of wages. And we have the same information in each of the tables that follow. So this is how we note information, cost information for labor. Then we have here an excerpt from also steps 2 and 3 for entering cost information on materials and services. And these are items that last less than 1 year, so they're used up within the productive period that we're looking at. And again, we have instructions in a text box that have been cut short. And then we have, again, a table for each productive activity. So we have in the first table, the first activity plan. We have the first few columns are for the date of purchase. Then we have the item. In this case, our examples include spray paint, markers, and waterproof paper sheets. We have the unit, the quantity, the price per unit, and again, a subtotal cost for each item purchased. for this productive period. And at the bottom of the table, a subtotal for this activity. And again, we have tables down below for each of the main productive activities. Okay, then the machinery and equipment, dividing up these costs for items that last often many productive periods and are used in many activities is a bit more complicated. So we've come up with 3 phases of analysis for dividing up the cost of machinery and equipment. And this has been excerpted from the worksheet for phase 1. So we have in the first few columns the date of purchase, and again, these are items that last many productive periods, so they may have been purchased a few years prior, but we list everything that's being used. So we have an example of chainsaws that were purchased in 2011. There were 5 of them purchased. We have the price per unit and the total cost. And then we have users note their useful life of each item, not based on a booklet that comes with these items when they're purchased, but based on the experience of the initiative that we're working with, because we recognize the conditions in which each initiative is working are very different. The amount of use is very different. So in this case, they said a chainsaw will last us 3 productive periods. So we have a depreciation cost that's calculated by taking the total cost and dividing it by the useful life. So this is our kind of simplified approach to calculating depreciation. And then we have columns after that, which are the title is activity in which item was used. We have the list of main productive activities, and users define if for each item it's used in each activity or not. And then in the following phases, we help users divide up the depreciation cost of machinery and equipment for this productive period over the activities in which they were used. So at the end, we have, again, the cost of machinery and equipment per activity. Okay, then this is an excerpt from our worksheet for noting income. It's titled Enter Sales. Again, we have a text box with instructions. We have a formula that's used for some of the calculations in the worksheet. And then we have 2 tables. One is for revenues from sales, and the other is for other sources of income. So in the revenues from sales, we have the date of sale, the name of the buyer, the product, which in this case is dimensional lumber. We have a couple columns to better describe the product. In this case, it's tropical hardwood, quality grade 2. Then we have the unit of product or service sold, which in this case is board feet, the quantity sold, the price per unit, and the subtotal revenue for each sale. And then at the bottom of the table, again, we have subtotals, one for quantity sold and one for subtotal revenue. And then in the other table, we have other sources of income, and in this example, we don't have any additional income. So this is to give you an idea of the worksheets that are used to enter cost and income information. Then when we get to step 5, we have a summary worksheet. This is an excerpt from that worksheet that shows the 2 main tables. And in this worksheet, information is brought in through links to the other worksheets and organized here by activity and by input type. So we have in the first table a list of the main activities and productive activities and administration. We have labor costs, materials and services, machinery and equipment. These are per activity. And then we have a subtotal cost per activity, the percentage that this subtotal represents over the total cost. And then we have the total cost divided by the number of units sold, which provides the average cost per unit. So I have some things I want to highlight here. For planning, we can see that we have highlighted in blue the subtotal cost, and this represents 4% of the total cost. If we go down in the table, we see highlighted in red the total cost of all of the productive activities and administration. Then if we go left a little bit, highlighted in orange, we have the subtotal for materials and services. So there's also a subtotal per type of input. And in this case, materials and services represented 45% of the total cost. So it is by far the largest cost for this operation. Then if we go down to the next table, it's titled Revenue, Net Revenue, and Rate of Return. We have the total revenue, which comes in from the worksheet that we just looked at for sales. We have the total costs, which comes from the table up above. Then we have net revenue, highlighted in green, and this is total revenue minus total costs. And then below we have the rate of return, which is simply the net revenue over the total costs, and that's for this productive period. And when we would get to this point in the workshops that we had, people would be really excited because even if they had detailed information on their costs and income and they were working closely with an accountant, they had never seen their costs broken down like this per activity and per type of input. So they would just get really excited about this, and it was really neat. It would spark a lot of discussion. And 2 points that we would emphasize here are that your subtotal of machinery and equipment, this is the subtotal of depreciation for this productive period. So this is basically the value that's being lost of machinery and equipment for this productive period. And it's equal, really, in essence, to what the Forest Initiative needs to save to replace equipment and machinery in the future. And in none of the cases, the folks that we worked with were people actually aware of this amount or actively saving for this, especially in cases where machinery and equipment had been purchased for them through projects in the past. So this was an eye-opener. And also, we emphasize the importance of looking at the average cost per unit. This is equal to the minimum price that the enterprise needs to receive to be able to at least cover its costs, and if they want to be able to do things like have profit to put into, say, a scholarship fund or a fund for improving infrastructure in the community, then it needs to be much higher than this. So this is really important information for decision making for forest-based initiatives. And as a researcher and someone who's worked a lot with community-based initiatives, I'm also very interested in looking at these results from another perspective, which is we could look at labor as income for workers and local families. So this is a significant financial benefit that's contributing to local economic development. As well, the subtotal for materials and services, which is highlighted in orange, is indirect, well, it's direct income for local businesses, and again, also helping contribute to local development. So these are really important and can be monitored over time, as can this indicator of financial viability or rate of return. And this is particularly, these 3 indicators can be particularly important for folks who are working with forest-based initiatives and want to see the impact of their work or their investments in them. So you can report changes in income for workers and local families and income for local businesses as an indicator of contributions to local development. And you can also look at how financial viability or rate of return changes over time with investments. So that's one example that was kind of a combination of information from different timber enterprises we looked at. And I wanted to share briefly some other types of enterprises that we've looked at that were really interesting. In one case in Peru, last year we looked at community timber plantations that were being established with help from an international project and municipal governments, and they were being put on community lands with active participation of community members, and especially in degraded areas in the Andes. And what community members found is that after establishing these plantations, mushrooms would appear. And someone recognized that these mushrooms are edible and have economic value. So we, in a workshop, looked at comparing the costs of establishing the plantation and the income from pine trees versus income from mushrooms, and we found that actually the mushrooms are more lucrative than the pine trees. So that was an interesting and kind of surprising finding. But in Colombia, the government there is very interested in helping strengthen the legal timber trade and sponsored a workshop in which we looked at an intermediary who transports lumber from a port near where tropical timber is harvested and milled to a port where a buyer is awaiting the product. And to transport this timber, the intermediary has to have transportation papers. And we found that official papers for permission to transport the timber cost 5 times as much as fake ones. which increased the total cost for the intermediary, in this case that we looked at, by 16%, or $46,000. And this means that fake papers are generating zero revenue for the state, so they lost $46,000 in this case, and it also interrupts the legal chain of custody for timber. And so the government needs to either crack down harder on transportation, make sure people have legal documents, or perhaps maybe look at changing the cost of those papers to make it less interesting to work with fake papers. And then finally, we had looked at a bamboo enterprise in Ecuador. They used green value 1 year and found that for their enterprise, which involves milling of bamboo, their labor costs were really high. So they decided to replace some labor with machinery, and found when they used green value again to look at their new costs and income that increased their profitability by 43%. They went from negative 1% valuable to 42%. So that was also an interesting case. So now I'm going to turn it over to Greg, and he's going to briefly present an example of a silvopastoral system. Go ahead, Greg.
Thanks, Shoana. My name again is Greg Fry. I work for the U.S. Forest Service, and I wanted to give everybody an example of a way that the green value tool could be applied to users in the United States. So a lot of you might be familiar with silvopasture, but it's the integrated and intentional combination of trees with livestock and pasture on a single parcel of land. Silvopasture has received interest from producers in the Southeast United States, but the adoption of the practice hasn't been very rapid. It's probably due to multiple factors, including the level of complexity of silvopasture systems, preconceived ideas about the potential interaction between trees, grass, and livestock, but also limited information about management and profitability. The green value tool has the potential to help producers understand this last issue. The example I'll briefly explain to you is loosely based on silvopasture establishment and management activities of multiple producers in the U.S. Southeast. We interviewed multiple silvopasture practitioners about their perceptions, experiences, and management activities. And then I combined several producers' experiences into a stylized and simplified budget using the green value tool. So the activities I'll show you do not represent any single producer or farm. And also the activities are abstracted from real experiences. And the dollar values are actually my own estimates and don't in any way reflect the actual producer's costs and returns. So while this example that I'm going to tell you about is very abstract and doesn't really have real dollar values, the green value could help potential adopters better understand financial opportunities and challenges, and more importantly, help actual adopters track and administer their own expenses and revenues. So this analysis that I did can provide an important starting point for adoption and better management in the future. So in this example, I assumed that a farmer purchased in 2011 an existing loblolly pine stand, which had been planted in about 1987 and had been previously commercially thinned one time. The farmer then undertook a second commercial thin in order to establish silvopasture on the site. The first step in this analysis was to state the products of the system. So this is how revenue will be generated. Then I decided productive phases for each product. I simplified the productive phases a little bit compared to what producers actually do on their farms, just to make the analysis a little bit more efficient for now. This could be built upon later. In this case, for simplicity, I decided to use only two products, timber and calves. However, all the producers I spoke to had more differentiated products than just these two, and more complex analyses certainly could include multiple products. I identified 3 phases of production in timber and 4 phases for calves. The phases for production of timber were a second thin, a third thin, and a final harvest, and the phases of production for calves were established pasture, improve pasture, spray and burn, and graze and maintain. For each productive phase, I completed a full set of green value worksheets. This includes first identifying the activities for each phase, second, inputting labor, materials and services, machinery and equipment for each activity, and third, including overall administrative costs as well as revenues from the sale of product. Here, you can see figures representing the summary output from the 3 timber productive phases. And here, you can see figures representing the summary output of the 4 calf productive phases. Each workbook represents a single year of a particular phase of production. The summary output separates labor, materials, and equipment by activity and allocates the expenses to each product. It summarizes the total income and total costs and calculates the net income and rate of return. Here you'll see the final output of my analysis from the net present value workbook set of worksheets, which estimates the net present value of the system. In this case, I found a net present value of about $14,000 on this 35-acre site at a 5% discount rate. While these dollar values are my own personal estimates and do not reflect any particular farmer, they could provide a starting point for silvopasture adopters to think about their own practices. Furthermore, the tool allows producers to dig into the results of each productive phase and really explore how costs align with revenues and where financial opportunities and challenges exist. I will note that the rate of return shown here at the bottom and calculated by the green value tool isn't the typical internal rate of return that we commonly use in forest economics. That's because Shoana and Tom, who are the authors of this, chose to make the calculation comparable to a rate of return used in single-year accounting. So this explains my basic example with silvopasture systems, and I'll turn it back to Shoana to conclude with some opportunities and next steps.
Thanks, Greg. Great. So if your interest has been piqued in green value, I wanted to share what you can do to further explore it. We have a website, which is green-value.org, where you can download the user's guide and worksheets, and you can follow the instructions on how to use them and potentially do this yourself. Tom and I prepared them, again, with detailed instructions and examples in the user's guide and detailed instructions in the worksheets so that folks could do just that. And when you go to download the worksheets, you'll see you have a couple different options. You can download worksheets for one product or service or for multiple products or services currently.
Shoana, we don't seem to be picking you up very well since you got that going. Can you check your volume?
I'm sorry. Yes, I think I needed to move my microphone. Okay, so you have options when you're downloading the worksheets. You can download some for one product or service or multiple. We also have a simple or advanced version, and I don't really have time to explain the difference between those, but I recommend choosing the simple or basic version to start out. And then if you're interested, you can also download the net present value worksheet for looking at values over time. Another option would be to organize a green value workshop with your local, regional, or state partners, for example, your State Forestry Association, extension agents, or continuing education programs. And if you're really a fan of green value after using it, you can also download the Green Value Facilitators Kit to teach others how to use it. And this includes all the presentations we use and posters during workshops. And all of these materials are available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And we would love to hear what you think about these materials, what you like about them, what could be improved. And if you're interested in sharing your results, again, we're always interested in seeing those. This is an excerpt from the Green Value website. It is available in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. So you'll land at a site that asks which language you prefer. Then when you go to the English version, this is what you'll see. And on the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a link to resources, and that's where you go to download these materials. As far as next steps, I want to say that we're very interested in identifying partners to carry out trainings and follow-up activities in the U.S. and other countries. Please let us know if you're interested in that. And we're also looking to secure funding to develop a Green Value smartphone application. We have the design. We just need some additional resources to make that design a reality and make it available to folks. And I'd like to acknowledge that USAID and the U.S. Forest Service's Office of International Programs has supported this work from way back in the mid-2000s when Tom and I first started looking at economic viability of forest enterprises and thinking about a tool, up through the project that I led the last 5 years that ended in July at Earth Innovation Institute. And I'd like to thank Kelly McCarter at NC State College of Natural Resources, Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources for organizing and helping us put together this webinar. And then you'll see at the bottom of the page, if you've worked internationally in Latin America, you might recognize some of these organizations that were very involved in helping us further develop Green Value, providing great feedback and ideas in the project over the last 5 years. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly, I think, to do the poll.
That's right. And thank you, Shoana and Greg. Now, since you're also really good at doing polls now, I want you to go ahead, someone's already started, go ahead and answer this question with the little check boxes, yes and no. Those little boxes appear near your name, and we want to know, do you think that Green Value would be useful for your work? Both yes and no answers are valuable to Shoana and Greg as they move forward with this. Their idea is that this product could be adapted especially to the rural underrepresented areas of forestry in the southeast U.S., to the growing silvopasture approach, and useful for any number of small to medium-sized forest landowners who want to have a better understanding of the forestry in their community and on their property. All right, I'll give this poll another 30 seconds before we move on to the next one. Make sure you stick with us because we have some important information at the end. I'm going to go ahead now and end this poll and publish the results. And Greg and Shoana, just make sure you make note of these responses. Okay. We're going to move on to the next question. Are you interested in participating in a webinar that would provide more detailed explanation on how to use Green Value as opposed to this one, which was really all about just making you aware that it exists and what it does? So please go ahead and I'll start the poll. Go right ahead and use your little drop-down X's and O's and No's to respond. All right. Thank you very much for that. I'll give that another 30 seconds. All right. Here's the response rate to that last poll. And thank you, everyone, for responding to that one. I have one more slide to show you. And Shoana and Greg, I hope you've had a chance to have a look at these responses.
Great. Yes.
All right. Shoana mentioned that she and Greg, along with Tom Holmes from the Forest Service, are interested in working with anyone that would like to do a more personal, customized, face-to-face type training or workshop on green value. So if you believe that you're in that situation, I encourage you to use any of the emails you see on the screen and to contact them directly to show your interest. So I'm going to type Shoana's email address into the chat window. Here is Greg. And then Tom Holmes. So now I'm encouraging anyone to type into the chat window any questions that they would like to put to, well, there's one right there. May we have a copy of this presentation? Shoana and Greg, we will be making an archived version of this webinar through the forestrywebinars.portal, but I could go ahead and post a PDF version of your slides for people to get to as well. Is this okay with you?
Absolutely. That'd be great. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you for the interest.
And that question from Rance Fry. Rance, if you would like to type in your email address in the chat window, I'm sure Shoana and Greg would take it down to work with you directly on that if you want. Any other questions? All right. Well, we have neared the point where it's time to allow people who took this webinar in order to get CFE credits or credits from the Georgia Forestry Commission. So I'm going to provide you now a direct push out, as it's called, that takes you to the online quiz, the satisfaction survey, and all the things that are required in order for you to get your continuing education credits. So stand by for that. And if anyone else would like to enter any questions, Shoana and Greg are still on the line and can continue to answer questions for everyone remaining. And I guess you noticed, Shoana, that Rance put in his email address.
I did, and I noted that. We'll send that. Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much, Shoana, and feel free to stay on the call as long as you wish, and anyone else wanting to enter information or ask questions, feel free to do so.
Maybe I'll just add that we also have an introduction to green value as a presentation that can be downloaded on the resources webpage. And we also have several examples of sets of worksheets that have been completed. So it has all the information for, I believe, a timber enterprise and some other types of products also available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese on our website under resources. So I encourage folks to check those out if they'd like to see how completed sets of worksheets all work together for the different steps to provide financial results.
Greg, I do have one question for you regarding the silvopasture. You mentioned that it hasn't picked up in the southeast quite as quickly. Can you reference some other part of the United States where this seems to be popular land use?
Well, to my knowledge, actually the southeast is probably where it is more prevalent within the United States, particularly some parts of Georgia and Florida. I think it's probably more common than other parts of the southeast. But it's something that there's people here and there throughout the country. But I will say that there's other parts of the world, not in the U.S., where this land use silvopasture is particularly common and well used, including New Zealand, some parts of Argentina, and some other places around the world.
Could this also be adapted to community forestry, like urban forestry in small towns?
Definitely, Shoana here. Yes, I'd love to see that, actually. We've, again, found that it can be used for a huge diversity of types of enterprises, and I think that would be really interesting. I know the Forest Service is has funds available for folks who want to start community forestry initiatives, and this could be really useful for tracking cost and income and making the case, again, from the types of benefits that these types of operations generate to hopefully help secure more funding in the future.